Okay, so let me begin by first introducing myself and saying that I'm quite aware that this is the last session of the second day, so I suppose that we're all a bit tired, and I'm going to try to make this as easy as possible for all of you. My name is Igor. I'm a member of parliament in the Croatian parliament. In terms of committee memberships, I'm mostly involved in issues of education, science and culture and different aspects of foreign and international affairs. I'm a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Vice Chairman of the European Affairs Committee, and I'm also representative of the Croatian Parliament in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, where I hold the position of the Vice Chairman of the Social Affairs, Health and Sustainable Development Committee. So most of these are related in some way to international relations. I'm going to speak about the effective leadership in international organizations. I also have from my previous life, I have a degree in political science. But I'm going to speak as a politician, and I was invited as a politician, and so this is going to be from the perspective of a politician with certain experience in the functioning of one of the international organizations, namely the Council of Europe. Let me just see the, is it the page down? Or?
It is, if you just click on the thing first. Click on the
okay, yeah, sorry. Okay, sorry about this. So the most basic of the most basic divisions that you can make is that there are intergovernmental organizations, the IGOs. At the moment, there's around 300 of those in the world, and then the international non-governmental organizations, the INGOs, which is around the 5,000 mark at the moment in the world. This is why I said that I'm going to speak from a perspective of a politician, so the idea of the international organization that I'm using through this presentation is the idea of the intergovernmental organization, the IGO, although I think that the basic principles that I'm going to suggest apply also to INGOs and different kinds of organizations, be it political, regional, economic, specific interests. The basic principles in terms of leadership that I'm going to suggest, I think, apply to all of them. This system has been in development for centuries now through cooperation of states on different levels and conferences, but we can say that after World War II, this has really kicked off, and the system of international organizations has really become more complex, more influential, and the organizations have become more numerous. The key issue, the key question that everyone is asking, and the key question that I was asking when I first came to the Council of Europe, but not only me, all of the colleagues that were already there, was what do we actually do here? Is this just a high level debate club? Is this some sort of intergovernmental think tank? And this is the question that doesn't really have a definitive answer yet. It's all of those things. The problem that international organizations have is that they are considered not to be very important. They are considered as not very important by the media, by the public, but also, unfortunately, by representatives of the academia. Even in political science, we always have a sort of, the international organizations are always somewhere in the second row, at best. It is my belief, though, I might be wrong here, but it's my belief that with the development of politics and general situation in the world in recent times, international organizations are being brought back into the focus, at least somewhat, by practical politicians, by practical politics, and also in theory. I hope this is so. It is my opinion. I hope it's not only based on my personal hopes and visions, but I do really have a feeling that it's so. The international organization has a sort of a foundation at one side, and the largest nemesis on the other side is the nation state. The nation state, that the organizations that I'm talking about are founders, and they kicked off the international organizations in terms of those that are founded by the nation states. But then on the other hand, the nation state is always the one, especially the strong states, the powerful states, that always reserve the real decision making for themselves, and the international organization is always somewhere second in line. The question that I'm asking today, and one of the questions for perhaps discussion later, is can they really keep up with that? Can they really do that in all aspects of politics? And my answer is no, of course not. There are a lot of decisions that by far and greatly surpass the limits of a nation state, and any nation state, even the most powerful one. There are so many international issues, and they're just growing and growing in number and in power, that the decision making on a global level without international organizations is not possible at the moment, and is certainly not going to be possible in the future. So the international organizations developed along with the development of the nation state. As the nation state became more powerful, the process of internationalization became more powerful, and the need for fora where international issues are discussed, and then international solutions and answers are being found, were becoming stronger and stronger. The other thing that needs to be mentioned here is also that the process that went along with these two is that the gradual codification of international law. So all these three things brought the system of international organizations into existence. This system is not a static fact. It's expanding, it's developing, it's changing every day in front of our eyes. And this is also something that needs to be taken into account. So, with the growth of industry, transport, communication, migration, trade, there are more and more issues in the 18th and the 19th and then 20th century, especially more and more issues that needed international leadership, that needed international decision-making, international leadership, and international organizations became irreplaceable in managing complex international, regional or global issues. It depends on the organization itself. And then suddenly, but not so suddenly, but it seems as it happened suddenly, we found ourselves in a very complex system where you have these organizations that include tremendous amounts of experts, unbelievable know-how in different fields. They combine state actors with private actors, group actors with individual actors. They formed a sort of a system, so to call it, of equality among unequals. You have elected leaders sitting with bureaucrats. You have small countries sitting at the same table with large countries. You have experts from the private fields with experts from the public field. So this equality among unequals and this experimental nature of international organizations all contributed to this institutionalization that led to forming of international governance structures, a very complicated system with a life of its own. And I stress this idea that this system has a life of its own, because a life of your own is maybe one of the foundations of being able to be a leader. You need to be able to have some sort of autonomy. Now, the founding state of any international organization obviously set a number of limits on the functioning of these organizations. But the further idea that I'm putting here for later discussion is that these limits are actually an asset in terms of leadership. One of the key issues with these limits is that international organizations are not considered as rivals by the nation states. The nation states consider international organizations as being, well, not really equal, to be quite honest. This position can be interpreted as a field and as a space to develop autonomy to perform. And like I said just a few seconds ago, in my opinion, the autonomy to perform is one of the foundations of being able to lead, of being able to be a leader. You have to be autonomous, at least in some respect, to be able to be a leader. And so this is one of the key issues that I want to stress here. Now, even the formal structure of international organization, I think, confirms that they have a tremendous potential for leadership. The formal structure was I'm using the example of the League of Nations because it was set up by at the time of the League of Nations. It hasn't really changed tremendously in its basic form since then. So you have an assembly, which is sort of a legislative body of sorts. You have a council, which deals with current affairs or crises, depending on the organization. You have a secretariat, that is the administrative service foundation of the work. And you have a court, which either manages disputes between the members or manages problems arising from treaties, convention, or contracts that different organizations are based on. And this is why I put, because along with this administrative structure or this architecture, so to say, there is always, in most of these organizations, there is a treaty, a convention, or a contract that is really the value foundation, so to say, of international organizations. The example of the Council of Europe, we have the Assembly, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, where around 350 elected members of Parliament sit 4 times a year for a week, discussing and debating resolutions and voting on recommendations. Then there's the Council of Ministers, the Secretariat. The Secretariat of the Council of Europe is a tremendous source of institutional memory, of knowledge, of expertise, and then obviously the court, the Strasbourg Court, the European Court of Human Rights, which is the most visible publicly element of the Council of Europe, in my opinion, which really in practice takes care of the convention which the Council of Europe is based upon. So all of these structural elements can be used and allow the international organizations to take a leadership role. These are the fundamental tools, so to say, with which the international organizations could be able and should be able to take more of a leading role in international politics. I'm also using an example of the International Labour Organization, just briefly, which precedes the UN system, which is, in my opinion, sort of a prototype of an organization that sets standards through international conventions. So this is really, an agenda-defining, standard-setting, leadership sort of organization in its field. Further thing that I would like to stress is that because international organizations have autonomy of sorts, although they have limits, but they also, within these boundaries, they have autonomy, and they evolve. And as time goes on, as things progress, they evolve, and this evolution wasn't and just cannot be foreseen by the founders. So these organizations more and more take upon a life of their own, not really completely in line with what the founders had in mind, be it negative or positive. This is open to discussion. But in my opinion, this is a process that really is going on. This is the multilateral diplomacy, the influences the issues, the roles of different actors, the interests that are here present, the relations between, I already mentioned, between different kinds of different levels of stakeholders here, the participants that take part in the work, the coalitions that are being made in these multilateral relations, the unimaginable networks that are being created here, is something that cannot be controlled. You can attempt to control it, and large and powerful states and powerful founders of these organizations do try. But in the end, in the final countdown, this is really something that cannot completely be controlled, and that has an absolutely a life of its own. And what this leads to is, and I'm repeating this term because it seems to me very important in terms of leadership, is the autonomy. And, as Renata and Verbeek, and I'm really simplifying this extremely, but as they put it in 1998, the autonomy of international organizations is derived from the knowledge that is present within them, from the fact that they define issues and solutions. And I'm going to stress the defining of issues. This is, in my opinion, very important for international organizations to really take the leadership role. It's not just the defining of solutions, it's also the task of defining the issues. What are the issues that we are dealing with? What are the issues that we are discussing? What are the issues that we are trying to find solutions for? And then the building of coalitions, which are absolutely not being built or not possible to be built by a national state on its own. So what we actually have is sort of a rational legal authority on a global or regional scale, depending on the organization. So the leadership issue of an international organization is situated somewhere between the motives of the organization itself and the interests of the members. I put states in commas because it's not always the states. I mean, it's not always the states that are the founders of organizations. I think that the rule applies to all. I will come a bit later, a bit more to this relationship between the international organizations and member states. What needs to be stressed as well in this discussion is that globalization, with the distribution of goods and services and capital and finance and migration of people and movement of ideas, religions, fashion, I mean everything that happens, communications, transport, internet, social networks, we're all in a virtual global forum, which is not really virtual. It's a real global forum, and the problems we have are also global. More and more, the environment, the problems arising from migrations, the weapons, the wars, the refugees, terrorism, health, even labor issues, union issues. I mean, with multinational companies being stronger than a lot of states. So even these issues are more and more becoming global issues that cannot be resolved at a national level. So, but parallel to globalization, we have, of course, as a reaction to this process, we have a process of fragmentation of political and social fragmentation and localization. So, what's needed is a new center of power. On one hand, globalization, on the other hand, fragmentation and localization. What's really needed here is a new center of power, and international organizations, I suggest, should take over and could take over as leaders in this process. So, to wrap it up, this part, the nation state, and this is what we politicians really very often see in our daily work, the nation state is rapidly losing its credibility. The faith in the national state is in the institutions is diminishing. On the other hand, global problems and global issues need a global leadership. But what I really want to stress here, and this is very important for this discussion, not, I repeat, not as a replacement for the state. because the state still has the legitimacy of its institutions, especially if you're talking about a Western type of democratic state with elected officials, with division of power, the legitimacy that the state brings still cannot be matched by any international organization. So the leadership of international organizations is not, I do not imagine it as being a replacement for the state. But, and international organizations cannot function without consent at some point of national state, at least of the founding states. Their legitimacy still depends on the legitimacy of the founder. But what they can do is they can take a lead in the process of development. And the example here is perhaps the European Union. Although the European Union is a very specific kind of international organization, not witnessed any time before, but the European Union, we can argue on that later, but the European Union, I'm suggesting this as an idea, really took off and took the leadership role upon itself the moment it got the moment it got the consent of the member states. At the moment that the member states consented to give some of the sovereignty that they had, the monopoly to European Union as an organization, that was the moment that European Union took off as a leadership project in a way. So in line with the concept of international regimes, by creating or accepting procedures, rules, and institutions, government can regulate transnational and interstate relations. But what I would like to add here is that procedures, rules, and institutions can also be created by international organizations. And in this respect, international organizations could and should take the leadership role. So they should not only wait for the national states to create rules, but they should also create rules and initiatives themselves. And there's a very good reason why national states choose to act through international organizations. The centralization of collective activities, which is very efficient, and the independence and neutrality, at least to some extent, in terms of resolving issues, is something that national states cannot achieve themselves. So there is a lot of opportunity for international organizations in this respect. And approaching the end slowly, and coming full on to the issue of leadership that we are discussing here. What are the needed characteristics of this kind of leadership? And I want to stress that when I'm talking about leadership here, I'm talking about the leadership that international organizations should take in international politics, but also the characteristics of the people leading the international organizations themselves. So two issues that go parallel one to each other. And that's, in my opinion, we could use the concept of transformation leadership. I know that this has been discussed yesterday. I'm sorry I wasn't here. Due to my job, I couldn't be here. So I'm not going to go very deep into this. But just a very brief overview. The basic idea here with these relationships that I'm talking about is that leaders and followers need to interchange. I don't mean to switch roles and then stay in these switched roles forever. But these boundaries, these limits between the leaders and followers should not be as strict as they are at the moment, and should not be as firm as they are at the moment. So if we imagine the followers to be at the moment the international organizations, then they need to take the lead. So the followers need to take the lead. The sense of identity to the mission and to the organization needs to be developed and strengthened within international organizations, and everyone taking part should really be able to take ownership of the work that is being done on international level in international organizations. Because the key goal of everything that an international organization does is the benefit of the whole community. And there is not the benefit of the whole community. And there is no better subject to think of the benefit of the whole community than the international organization. I'm coming back just briefly to that structure that I mentioned with the assembly, the council, the administration, the courts. So all of these institutions that can really take into account the benefit of the community that they represent. They need to be an inspiring force in fulfilling the mission of the organization, of maintaining and developing the identity of the organization, and finding new ways of change and new solutions. And if I'm not mistaken here, but please correct me later if I was wrong, finding new ways of change and finding new solutions is one of the key elements of transformational leadership. So, leading instead of managing. And, the interesting thing about leading and managing is that if you take the word that this is based on, leading is based on the word that means to go. So it means, taking a step forward, even leaping into the unknown, taking initiative. And managing comes from the word hand, which means, taking a process or a product or something into your hands and then seeing it through. But this is not, and this is what international organizations are doing now, in my opinion. They are managing issues. They are not leading, unfortunately. Look at the situation with Ukraine. They are managing issues and they are managing them badly. The idea that I'm advocating here is that they start really leading in solving issues, but I repeat, also in defining issues. In defining the issues and then defining solutions and answers to these issues. So international organizations need to take the leadership by inspiring nation states in achieving core values and visions through mutual stimulation. I repeat once again, this is the last slide of my presentation, so just to repeat a few key thoughts here. I repeat, not as a replacement for the nation state, but they need to use all of the resources that are at their disposal to really take upon themselves to lead in defining the issues and finding solutions for solving problems. And coming back to the Council of Europe, when I sit there, 4 times a year for a week, and when I discuss this with my colleagues, and it doesn't depend if they're from Germany or from France or from Ukraine or from Italy, if they're this generation or that generation, this political option, that political option. When we're there, it seems to us that the opportunities are endless. The knowledge base is huge. Even the mechanisms developed for monitoring countries, for setting standards, are incredible. The only question we don't have the answer to is, why don't we do it? Why are we still so unsuccessful in achieving the leadership and the leading role of international organizations in international politics? And politics are more and more becoming international, and less being defined only by the boundaries of a single state. So thank you so much. I try to be as brief as possible, taking into account that it's been a long day. This is the point where I'm going to end. So now I'm open to discussion and questions, but I think that the 2 panelists are going to add quite a bit to my attempt of giving you some sort of a basis for a discussion. Thank you so much for your attention.
Igor, I think on behalf of everybody here in this room, I must congratulate you because you touched upon so many different issues. They are all so relevant that to comment them all, it won't give justice to your own presentation. But I will try to pick up on a few things. because you touched upon issues such as governance of international organizations. Perhaps I should start from there, and effective leadership in international organizations and governance. One comment I could offer is the fact that governance, of course, is inbuilt in international organizations. Not each international organization has its own governance system. But this governance is informed by governance. So, and I'm saying that because it's a general principle that is applied to all international organizations. It's impossible to have a divide between the international organization on one side and governments on the other side. In reality, governments are part and parcel of the equation. I mean, they are integral part of the equation, and it would be, sorry if I say so, hypocritical to think that international organizations have a life of their own, disjoined by governments. Of course, I mean, I am one of those, as yourself, that believe that mandates should be observed. That if international organizations have been set up, created, it's because a mandate has been developed. And the mandate has been developed on the rationale that there is a need. You have mentioned the International Labour Organization, and you have mentioned the International Organization for its peculiarity. This is an organization founded in 1919 in the aftermath of the Versailles Treaty with one purpose in mind. It was to preserve peace. And lay the foundations for prosperity among nations. How doing so? Of course, throughout international relations. International relations and industrial relations. Those was the time that we were talking about industrialism. Now we are in the post-industrial era. But how doing so? Through social dialogue. That was, and is, even today, a fundamental operational mode for the International Labour Organization. Now, of course, you mentioned the importance of the standard setting, the development-oriented work that the organization provides. This is part and parcel, is enshrined in the constitution of the organization itself. So I think that one point is back to mandates. If I had to make a recommendation, is back to mandates, meaning that nowadays we have a very fragmented terrain, as you said, that is populated by a multitude of international organizations. I mean, first of all, let's not forget that all the non-governmental organizations that flourished, that came out into public in recent years, they are also international organizations that have a very powerful mandate themselves, and they are extremely operational and active. In many ways, they even deliver much better than the so-called established international organizations. So the point is that, first of all, when I say back to mandate, it means that international organizations are policy-oriented, and for the great majority are policy-oriented because they don't have, I mean, due to the machinery that they have in place, they don't have the flexibility, they don't have the possibility of downscaling in certain cases and applying themselves into certain specific areas, localized areas where you need an immediate dispatch of energies, capital, and technicalities to deliver certain things. Of course, the same organization, international organization, operate at local level as well, but they cannot pretend to resolve all the issues when a crisis strikes, because they are not the only ones on the same terrain. So the point is competition. Now, competition among international organizations, and why this competition is created. Very often competition is created because mandates overlap, because there is this nebulous area where mandates are unclear. I mean, why this happens? It happens because the competition is generated very often by the same governments. The same governments that are good donors, that promote good donorship principles. At the same time, they instill the principle that you have to be effective, that you have to be measurable in your own indicators and in your own activities, but then, so doing, they create the need to multiply your own deliverables. Now, multiplying your own deliverables creates an excessive competition. And again, when I say back to mandate, it means that. I mean, reflect on why the organization has been established, what are the needs for the organization. And then you become selective, and you can reappropriate yourself of what the organization is all about. Another point that I think you touched upon is relevance in terms of separate international organizations. And this relevance, of course, remains, because if there is a mandate and there is a need, international organizations continue to operate. But it's more and more relevant, the fact that organizations operate in networks. So no more you see one international organization operating in one corner and another one operating in another corner. You have networks or organizations, whether are on the developmental side, or the humanitarian side, or the normative side, in human rights or whatever, you operate in networks. So this means that you have additional constraints. But doing so, I mean, it's also true that you manage, once you manage, and of course the leadership development principles are even more complex. We are talking of complex organizations that tend to become even more complex. So why they become complex? Because you have to add them up and then streamline and then decide what is the course of action that has to be taken according to the prevailing objectives that you have, but in a network. So again, we cannot talk about international organization in isolation one from the other. So this is another point I wanted to make. The fragmentation, you said you spoke about it, and I think it's very important. One point I wanted to make is, because we're talking of, governments, again, governments populate, as I said, governance of international organizations. And there is maybe an effort that governments should make to detach from the management of those international organizations as much as possible. Because here we are talking of a change, no? You're talking of positive change and transformation. So, of course, if you, excuse me if I use the word perhaps is not appropriate, but if you infiltrate international organizations with specific agendas and political agendas or objectives of governments, where is the principle of multilateral interdependence and neutrality that you were talking about? I mean, I think that if you abstain and if you let those who have to lead, and those who have to manage, probably you will have a better result. So I think that this effort to detach, not to take distance from international organizations, if we believe really international organizations, has to be exercised in terms of politics. A final reflection is actually looking into the organizations themselves. And I will take the example of the United Nations system altogether, of the competency framework that is used, providing competency framework that is used for leadership, just one element of leadership. I think that there are various competencies that are required. I'll mention a few, but I think you will find that some of them are really intrinsic in the objectives of the organizations themselves, like to play a role model, to really serve as a role model, to help empower others and translate vision into results, to be proactive in developing strategies and accomplish objectives. This is all competencies that are required for top leaders in international organizations. Establish and maintain relationships with a broad range of people, understanding needs and gain support. Anticipate and resolve conflict, drive for change, show the courage to take unpopular stand. This is something that often is underestimated, but we need to take unpopular decisions. I mean, this is, we didn't discuss that, but this is also intrinsic in the values and abilities of international leaders. Now, the final point I would like to make is that there are certain changes that are occurring in international organizations that are worth exploring further. Joint system risk analysis. This is something that goes across the board. I mean, again, we cannot afford to have a risk analysis that obviously has to be done at the top level in isolation. So leadership coordination, and again, strategic leadership coordination among the various agendas and leaders in international organizations. And also the exercise of lessons learned. I mean, how important it is to bring together the success stories and the failures that we all have experienced. And not to just to document them, but to use them to improve further decisions. I mean, to improve how decision making is going to be taken into international organizations. These are probably common functions of leaders, but also of leaders in different international organizations. So I am a true believer in multilateralism, but again, in order to have multilateral organizations function, we need also a healthy governance and, as I said, sometimes a certain detachment from governments themselves into positions that otherwise, become only the terrain for unhealthy compromises.
Okay. I want also to join thanking the reporter and to thank the co-reporter, the panelists, for his very interesting contributions to the discussion. I manage a small non-governmental organization, and I will be talking from that perspective, because I think it's very interesting. There was a political perspective, international governmental organization, and NGO. You know, the first question, I think that we're talking about effective leadership in international organizations. What are the criteria of effective leadership? We have not discussed that even because it seems obvious, but frankly, from my perspective, I can tell you the three most usual questions when people ask about effectiveness of our organization. First, most often, what is your budget? Second, who knows about you? I haven't heard about your organization. Third, what's the impact of the organization? Meaning the impact. Whom do you talk to? Do you talk to governments? Do you talk to the United Nations and other organizations? Or you are not doing that? Does it remind you anything? I started my yesterday presentation with 3 temptations, and they are exactly that. Wealth, your budget, who knows you? Popularity, fame, and whom do you talk? Power. What is your power? I think even in terms of understanding, we have already corrupted our goals simply by attributing this criteria of efficiency of our work. And actually it's very easy to get on this, with this criteria. With wealth, I can tell you, I had to decline offers of millions of contributions to the organization, simply because I don't want to be in a position when the tail starts to wag the dog. When you receive some money from corporations that needs that and wants to be affiliated with the green structure, it will demand something after that. The same goes with some nations and with governments as well. The fame, the popularity, I haven't heard about you. Yes, I know that many people have not heard about Green Cross. But that's not because we are not working well. That's because we avoid any populism. We are not just activist organization. I understand that if we were chaining ourselves to some, factory with the slogans of green, maybe we would have been much more popular. We are not doing that because we are working on a solution of the problems and not just raising awareness, which is why I'm not doubting the importance of it, but simply I'm talking about our freedom. And of course, power. It's very easy, again, to succumb to some agendas which are not related to exactly sustainable issues, a sustainable development agenda, and you will get all necessary contacts and everything. So I want to switch now from this criteria to some characteristics of the current leadership of the organization, or management of the organization, because leadership, in fact, is management with change. That's what we're talking about, leadership. First, no leader can predict future. Somebody, I think in the morning today, said about leaders creating the future. No, it has never happened. Leaders never create the future. Leaders interpret present in a new way that opens the way to the future. That's totally different thing. And how to interpret the present in a new way, especially now with the accelerated change which affects the system itself. Today we have to adapt not only to the, let me say, changes that we see around us, but to the speed of change itself, which becomes a self-important factor. Because any system has its own speed level limits. Speed compels to take sometimes decisions very quickly, even before they go through the usual chains that need to be consulted, advised, and sometimes it brings a very bad decisions in the international arena. But I must tell you that it is inevitable, and I'll give you an example from my childhood. It's not related to the international organization, but it was not too long after the Second World War. I was maybe about 5 years old, and I saw an accident in the street. Suddenly a man collapsed, and he couldn't breathe at all. He was just suffocating. A crowd of people came around and started to call somebody, the ambulance. At that time there were no mobile phones, so it was a long process. And suddenly a woman in her maybe 40s came out of the crowd and started, "Man, do you have a knife? Does anybody has a knife?" Everybody ignored. So she grasped a bottle, empty bottle somewhere in the corner of the pavement, hit it, and with a glass he cut the throat of the person that was lying there. Blood, everything, people crying. she must be crazy. They just took her. At that time, ambulance came, and the doctor said, well, she did the only thing which was necessary to save her. It was tracheoscopy. Turned out that she was a renowned surgeon that has worked during the war in the field conditions, and she knew how to use just whatever it is to save lives. She didn't have time to think. She didn't have time to consult. That was the leadership. On the top of it, she understood the demands, and she saved a life. So that happens today. But at the same time, that creates growing uncertainty. Because you were absolutely right. All the organizations today are so connected to the governments, between themselves. So, frankly, any manager of any organization has to be a very bad bureaucrat. And that is something which restrains our activity, because we endlessly coordinate with many organizations, with many governments, what to decide, how to decide, that blocks the speed of the decision making. What is needed? Well, clearly it is non-linear mentality today, what is needed for the decision making in the international organization. I would say a quantum leap in understanding of the reality. What does it mean? Frankly, there are 2 points I wanted to raise, and when listening to that, to the discussion, of these 2 days, I was even a bit surprised that we have not mentioned that before. And it's very important for non-linear mentality. That these are such things like serendipity, which is absolutely necessary now in the decision making, because without that, without the understanding of the connections of what can happen in other areas at all, you cannot become a successful leader. I am here today, and I'm spending the World Academy of Arts and Sciences. I'm honored to be a member of this institution, but I'm leading Green Cross. So that means I'm away for almost 8 days, 4 in Podgorica, 4 here, and it might be considered from the point of view of my staff that I'm wasting my time. I should be working on the agenda of Green Cross. But I'm here exactly because I am looking for serendipity, something that will just pop up that will be very important for what I'm doing. And I can assure you that since this is not the first time I'm coming here, I'm gathering this house. The second point is synchronicity, which is also an extremely important, let me say, factor of the decision making. Linear mentality supposes that there are only causal relationship between the events. In the modern world, that's not enough. There are lots of meaningful relationship in the world. You cannot trace causal relationship between them, but they are connected. You feel that they are connected. It's simply we cannot trace, but it pushes you in the direction of analysis. What are real connections? I will give you one example. Climate change and financial crisis of 2008. Seemingly not connected. But since they were happening rather synchronously, and when we start thinking about that, we come to a lot of conclusions about how they are connected. And that opens absolutely new horizons. I must say that I'm also a proponent of multilateral structure. Clearly, the globalization process will be pushing us in the direction of the development of multilateralism, despite of all the problems we are facing today with multilateral attitudes and politics. But at the same time, I think that the nature of multilateralism will be changing. We will be moving away from linear multilateralism, where under multilateralism we consider only the different state players, governments, being united in the United Nations or elsewhere. We're going to network multilateralism, where we will have not only governments, because also the internal domestic governance system will be changing. They will become much more flexible. They will be absorbing a lot of, business community, civil society players, because today, to deliver a decision from the government to a community, you cannot do it without civil society. You try to go through local authorities, and they still need the civil society in order to be, let me say, this driving force to deliver the message and to start working on them. The same things will happen in the international. It will be a lateral structure, I'm sure, with the inclusion of all sections of the modern society, governments, international organizations, civil society groups, and on top of that, I would call them asteroid social, let me say, elements. Like we talked in Podgorica, we have today Bilderberg Group. Where do you think? They become already an element of the decision making in the world. And they will become even more. We have Club of Rome. We cannot deny that its limits of growth did not influence, did not have any impact. It had an impact on the international development and on governance as well. So these are asteroid think tanks or groups. They are involved in the oikumena, let me say, of the global governments occasionally, coming to going away for some time, and then again reappearing. That will be happening on a growing scale. Well, that's actually what I wanted to say. Thank you.
So it's me again. So please, I'm
Congratulations to the entire panel, and while we all expected this performance from Alexander and Donato, I have to congratulate you, Igor, that actually, since you are new here, we were not yesterday, here you really spoke as if you attended several and many of the World Academy and the Club of Rome meeting, because the spirit is exactly the one that most of us share. And you provided a very good and balanced view of leadership in the international and intergovernmental organization. And let me emphasize several things, what you said, then I will come to other speakers. Since after all you have not been present at many meetings of the World Academy, let me say that for your benefit and for benefit of the younger people, the general position that you expressed when you said that sovereign nation states are in a way decreasing their influence, this is exactly the view of the founding fathers, both of the World Academy and of the Bangladesh movement, and of course of the Club of Rome. Just to remind you, a famous Einstein-Russell manifesto ends with the sentence, "Remember your humanity and forget the rest." The rest is nation states, everything is the rest. And of course, this statement is extremely strong. Now, why they did do that, and this was in 55, right? So in 55, 10 years after the Second World War, they did that, and where, the first question is, were they corroborated by anything else? Yes, overwhelmingly so. By the end of the 20th century, my friend Winston taught me that there is an excellent study by a Hawaiian professor, Rummel, who actually coined the word democide, where he has shown that in the 20th century, 260 million people were killed by their own government. Not in a war, by their own government. This means all the failure of the sovereign nation states. Of course, any one of us knows that the concept of the sovereign nation states really starts first with the Augsburg and then with the Westphalian Peace Treaty, 1648 until now. Okay, we had states before and so on, Sumerian, Babylonian, blah blah, Egypt, whatever you want, China and so on. But the concept that Kissinger speaks about as a world order is the world order founded in 1648. And that system, of course, as I said, has resulted in this many casualties. On top of that, there are 60 million people killed in the Second World War, there are 20 million people killed in the First World War, 10 million people killed in Vietnam, Korea, blah blah, Afghanistan, and so on. So these are shocking numbers. To make things even worse, at the end of the 20th century, not in killing directly, but causing deaths of 420 million people due to essentially poverty. This is the study which shows that from 93 to 2000, whatever the 24 years, 2013, there are 400 million people whose deaths can be attributed to sovereign states. So that would be really a devastating destruction of the concept of the sovereign state. On the other hand, as our President Harlan Cleveland said, and you said it also, and both of the panelists said, we have to look at our successes. They made a number of very important successes. If they would not be there, unfortunately, what many worse things would happen. So even among those 260 million killed by their own government, in case of these so-called dictators, pseudo-dictators, and so on were not there, possibly maybe through fratricidal killing and so on, worse things would have happened. So things are not that easy. Anyway, there were a number of very important things that they have done. All of the treaties. Now, there are several treaties that we should look very carefully and see why some of them are successful. For instance, the Montreal Treaty is an example of a very successful treaty. On the other hand, the Kyoto Treaty, and there is an intergovernmental organization there doing that, IPCC. That obviously did not quite still succeed. Why? Then there is another one, and it is bad that our friend Igor is still not here because he essentially created the CTBTO, Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. That is a good organization in many ways, but still, I think there are 5 crucial states lacking to ratify the CTBTO, and strangely, among them is United States, and I believe India, and strangely, Russia has ratified it. So there are all sorts of totally strange things that are happening there in these two organizations which are intergovernmental. Now, I think it is very important, the point that all of you stressed, and I am very much in favor of that, opposite to our founding fathers, I think we should say, remember your humanity and stop there. Not go to forget the rest, because the rest are important. Let's keep the sovereign state as they are, but let us enrich, of course, constantly improve them, but let us enrich them through this intergovernmental, international NGO, and all of them, whatever they are, through particularly the multilateral interswitching somehow, or as much as it can be, because there are certain things which I don't think will change quickly. I don't think, for instance, that we will quickly forget about the P5, the Anita power, nor do I think that we will quickly have the elimination of nuclear weapons. As a matter of fact, if anything, things would go in the opposite direction. We will have gross violation of sovereign nation states here and there. Many of them will fragment, not necessarily for the better, maybe even for the worse. And whatever we can do in multilateralism, in cross-fertilizing, will be good. And the comment to what you said, Alexander, you used it in Podgorica and you repeated it here, and you said that leaders, of course, should occupy the future, implying in a way that the future is not made by the leaders. However, future, you will agree quickly, is made by the geniuses. Geniuses do create the future because the things that quantum physicists have done by creating quantum physics, those that ICTP people have done, those that fortunately or unfortunately people spearheaded by Alberto will continue to do with our brain, and our mind, will be shocking, and this would be the true future. So I think this is in a way, this distinction between the leaders, I mean, not a distinction, it's again overlapping. One of them creating the future, the other, the duty is to really occupy the future and put us in that positions to be actually there.
Am I the one?
Yes.
So I'll just go in the order that the hands were raised.
Why don't you start at that end?
Okay, we can do that. Then Mr. Kovacevic. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I will put all those things in a little bit different global perspective. After World War II, the United States used to be, still is, entrepreneur of the norms. Many norms on which international organizations, especially the United Nations, have been built up, essentially were proposed and created by the United States. After Cold War ended, the United States remained as a sole superpower. And from that fact, many serious problems arise. It seems that because of the fact that the United States is the only superpower, certain political circles, but the most influential political circles in the United States recognizes international bodies and are ready to abide them only if the international bodies' decisions, only if those decisions are in line with U.S. Multilaterally defined interests. And I think that this is one of the crucial problems of contemporary multilateralism. It seems that the United States is trying to establish a global empire, presenting it as a liberal again. Empire means that empire state is making rules and is imposing rules to everybody else. And hegemony means that all states are participating in creating norms and all of them are ready to fulfill requirements on the basis of those norms. My opinion is that present situation is that the United States are pretending that they are
maintaining liberal hegemony, but they are trying to establish a global empire, and direct consequence of that is ruining of authority of existing international organizations, like UN, for instance, or World Bank, or the International Monetary Fund. There are many examples. For instance, you have already mentioned Kyoto Protocol. There is International Criminal Court. The United States rejected to ratify the statute of that court. There is politics of establishing coalitions of willing instead of implementation of Security Council decisions. Preventive war, which is counter all of basic UN principles. After bearing in mind all these, let's say, facts, it's reasonable to question: are we really moving to network multilateralism, or we are just witnessing the dissolution of any possible global order? You have mentioned that the role of states, national states, is decreasing, but in the same time, some of big, huge states are trying to increase the importance of national state. The United States are the first among them. But there is Russia, there is China, and it seems that they are moving not toward possible consensus or new global order or network multilateralism, but it seems that they are pushing toward a new multipolar order without clear rules of behavior.
There's something with my little common sense that I don't understand. There are so many, you mentioned it, myriads of international organizations. And there's so much knowledge, so much wisdom, so much strategy, so much studies, blueprints, solutions. And it's not mainstream yet. Because these organizations are not inclined and not willing to work together. We have the big problem of terrorism. What can be solved? This is ludicrous that we speak about democracy when people are killed and nothing is done about it. So I don't understand why is it possible that in the 21st century, when we speak about evolvement, about evolution, that something like this is ludicrous. How can you explain it? That was the first question you raised. What are we doing? What are we for? What can we do? We can not do much, because even organizations are not willing to work together. And there is a lack of global vision of the future for the greater good of humanity and for the survival of the planet. We have decades of negotiations about climate change, and the studies are there on the table, but not picked up. So what's the problem?
Yes, please. Well, I'd like to thank all the three speakers for very interesting insights into a very complex issue. I'm only going to refer to a few points that I think can merit further comment, but I enjoyed much else that was discussed. Alexander, your comment on synchronicity was so interesting because it really belonged in the earlier discussion this morning when we were talking about leadership and thought, or the mind of the leader. because being able to look at things that I fully, in my own experience, in every field, I fully believe in what you say, whether we understand the causal links or not. Seeing things that happen corresponding in time and trying to understand the relationships between them creates, reveals very important insights into how things can be addressed. And the fact that those connections are not external, they're not visible, they're not linear, which is enough normally to inhibit us from discussing it publicly, I think effective leadership necessitates that insight. So it was a very important point to add to our earlier discussion. Igor, I really enjoyed your analysis of the leadership in international organizations. I wanted to speak to some of the general comments and try to put this in the perspective, or at least share my perspective on it, a better way to say it. We've had the institution of family for thousands of years. And as Alberto and many others can tell us, and many of us from our personal experience know, we're still a long way from learning how to lead and manage human relationships at the level of the family. The nation state is really still in its infancy. I mean, most countries, India has only been a nation state for 60, 70 years. Before that, in its whole history, it was never a nation state. It was a civilization. At the time of independence, there were 500 princely states outside of the British Raj. And this is true relatively around the world. When we look at the nation states, even the most mature of them, or what we think of as the most powerful of them, we see that in terms of how they are led and organized and managed, they are still in a very early stage of development. I agree with all the inadequacies, disappointments, frustrations, and criticisms of the international organizations, whether we criticize the nation states for obstructing them or the international organizations themselves for being ineffective. But I think if we look at it in a historical perspective, we're just in the very beginnings of something that hopefully will go quickly, but I think we can't afford to be too frustrated or too pessimistic about it, because in the early stages we saw what happened to the League of Nations, and we're doing definitely much better in the next round than we did with the League. And I think if we look at it historically, what's happened in the last 60 years, after two horrendous Cold Wars, after centuries of warfare in Europe, regardless of what the numbers say, and the numbers really do speak very well for the fact that we have contained war and violence, even if we've not eliminated it. For the first time in human history, we've got almost all the groups in humanity coming and sitting together, and instead of fighting everything out on the battlefield, instead of everything being determined by force, we're sitting down and discussing it. It's far from democratic, it's far from ideal. But I think the more important question for me is not that these institutions are not doing or living up to our highest ideals, because none of our institutions are doing that. But what can we do? What type of leadership can help build these institutions? I like what you said, Igor, about the fact that a lot of what's going on in the international sphere and in the international institutions today is not what's going on the surface at all. The networking, the enormous opportunities, the enormous contact. I mean, can we conceive of a time in human history where we knew each other this well, or could think 4 days ago we were in Puerto Rico and we were talking with Alexander about the situation in Russia, and somebody who didn't know who was where might be wondering who was from Russia and who was from other countries, because we're learning, slowly, but we're learning to look from other perspectives, to see things in other perspectives. So I think the real question before us is, if the institutions are inadequate, we know why they're inadequate. We know why all our institutions are inadequate. We know our weaknesses. I think the question is, what could we do in these very difficult, challenging, evolutionary, you use the word continuously, evolutionary situation? What can we do to speed the evolution of these institutions? And as much as I like the discussion today, I don't have the answer to that. But as somebody said, asking the questions is more important for the first 15 minutes. I think that's a right question for us. What can we do to make these institutions more effective than they are, both from inside and outside? Thank you all for your contribution.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Yes, I want to go so much of what you think here. I thought that Igor's summation of the framework of challenges that we confront is accurate, and I think the starting point of moving forward has to be realism. He gave us a good dose of that. I wanted to just comment on a few things. One is, I'm not so sure that our multilateral institutions who function with governments have the necessary constituencies behind governments to support them as well on progressive questions. And so, although we have a vast array of NGOs who weave in and out, I think the systematics of that are somewhat problematic. I remember in the context of the Yugoslav war, where some terrible mistakes were made by the UN. And the answer we got was, well, we're just a directorate of states. A few states tell us what to do, and that's what we do. And so, sure, there are states, they put those limitations in there, and we can't go beyond those mandates that they actually gave us. There are several issues, of course, that are on the agenda today. For example, have we considered the emergence of the G20 as the formulation of an economic security council outside of the UN system? What is its constitution? What are its records? What policies is it making that affects the rest of us? And we have no real access to what's actually going on. So there are things happening. With regard to the problem of US empire and the UN, that is a contested domain currently in the US. And there are powerful constituencies that want to see an omnipotence of the United States, and there are others who recognize there are clearly limits to what the United States can do. This $2 trillion adventure in Iraq has bankrupted the country, and you can't afford several more $2 trillion bullseyes, you see. So even within the US, there is imprint of moderation, but it is a contested domain, and unfortunately, we don't quite have the losses. One of the only ones we're thinking at least about what we should be doing here, or how to strengthen the UN role in this, and so on. And I don't think it's off the table, with all due respect to my colleague Igor, that we shouldn't consistently raise the question of changing the organization of the Security Council. Why? Because in historical terms, it was the most important thing civilization had put on the table. That is collective security for all. And you can't allow it to wither away. It's irresponsible to allow it to wither away. So I think there are modest changes. Add 3 members, India is logical, the largest democracy in the world, Germany, the most effective economy in the world, Brazil, the big heavyweight from Latin America, and 2 votes to veto. would change the whole structure of global security, in my judgment. So I don't think sometimes those changes are so gargantuan that we can't move with them. Now, another illustration of the fact that some of these are doable if we can get the right people, the right pressures, the right timing, and that's the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. In my judgment, when you put the NPT and the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty together, you've come 95% in the way of getting rid of nuclear weapons. So it's extremely important. But what are we talking about? We say it's the United States. It's not the United States. In fact, overwhelming majority of the people in the United States want the CTBT. And the majority of the members of the Congress want the CTBT. And the administration wants the CTBT. We're talking about 5 or 6 senators.
They don't want it.
They don't want it, and they're holding it up, you know? But that's not an impossible task to find a way to get 5 or 6 senators to move this thing forward. I can't understand why Kerry and Obama and the others are so frightened of their own shadows on this thing. It's very disappointing, but the same people that blocked the International Criminal Court, I quote from the extreme right wing, we destroyed the League of Nations, and this is an enemy that must be destroyed. Quote unquote, from the floor of the Senate here. Some real fools there, to be sure, but okay, you know, right now that gap has been narrowed, and it is a legitimate question made, which the US has raised, and we don't really have an appropriate answer to that, and that is, if you say you want to juridicalize the concept of aggression, well, you've got to understand that in international law, it's the Security Council that makes a political decision to say this is aggression. But we really don't have the juridical experience or the technique to know exactly how legally you would say something is aggression. It's not simple to juridicalize it. And so the US represent, well, let's try to figure out how to do this. I think I know how it should be done, but, you know, I'm just a dope in a small town university, so nobody takes me seriously. But okay. What I'm trying to get at is that I think that a huge number of the issues that we are addressing are not just over there. In fact, there are contestants. There are others who think very differently, who want a very different vision of the world. And we can't pretend that we're living in a vacuum, but we need to not only formulate, but we need a strategy of advocacy, of targeted advocacy, and consistency. Ideas sometimes ground themselves by repetition. That may be boring to the geniuses, but it does work in the political world. Thank you.
We have time for one more. I think that there's one more. We have time for one more.
Thank you very much for the three, the panel and the presenter. I think we're getting really to overwhelming topics, and maybe the only way to try to corner issues, options, opportunities, risks, is to really go back to a meta position and at the same time look at individuals. On the individual side, I would like to bring up the concept from Manfred Max Neef, who is a sociologist, who talks about human fundamental...
the Club of Rome also.
Okay. Yeah. Human fundamental needs. There are 9 of them. They are all interdependent, and they have nothing to do with creed, beliefs, or race. And I'll just read them quickly, because if we believe that those are fundamental to each individual, so each individual can be fully who he was born, then maybe something will change at a higher level. So it is about subsistence, protection, affection, understanding, participation, leisure, creation, identity, and freedom. You can find everything on Wikipedia. He'll say much more than what I just described. But I think what is important is to go back to those fundamental human needs. And maybe that is something that everybody has in common. Everybody, no matter where he is on the planet, no matter if we are in a rich country or a poor country, if these are fundamental human needs, who is the guarantee today, who gives the guarantee that each person can actually access and fully live those fundamental human needs? The other side that I appreciated is the energy of a young European person who sees that the potential is there, it's just not exploited. And there I think it's all about leadership. How many people believe, like you, that actually the potential can be exploited? If you get connected, if you relate to each other on the informal side, then you build the think tanks and the government tables that Alexander was mentioning to actually give the impulse that makes a difference, that says, okay, here were the rules of the past, they blocked us, they impede us to exploit the potential. Can we live in a different way together and just decide, here's what makes sense, this is what is in the interest of the majority? Going back to your presentation, the common greater good. So if you sense it from the inside, you know what is right. How many people can you gather to actually act upon it and initiate a movement to go into this direction? If it would be easy, it would have been done. But the question is that the courage of the leadership of the 21st century to say that, yes, there have been many bottom-up movements over the last 50 years, and we heard about that, how they came about. We took the Société des Nations as an example. But as of today, what do we actually need? And if you know inside of you, and you have mentioned so many other people, know also how to go beyond the current obstacles. And obviously, can we help you to get there? We don't want you to go there alone. And maybe that's what the World Academy of Arts and Science is also all about, is to walk with those who want to lead tomorrow. The bottom-up energy, if we take the physics as a metaphor, is the Brownian movement. You have tons of organizations that all move in different directions, and if you measure all the different vectors, maybe the sum is very little or close to zero. And where does it come from? There is no guiding force. There is not enough guiding force. There is not enough principles that are set up to maybe give the energy into one direction. And I think it was you, Gary, that talked about the laser. We have lots of energy and lots of light, and we make it a laser. And that means that the think tanks, the governance tables, the networking of the multilateral organisms need maybe a different consciousness. They need maybe those new leaders, the 21st century leaders. Because we can continue to build up as many organizations as we want. If we do it always with the same consciousness, we'll always get the same results. So I think I'll leave it at that, but thank you very much. Very complex topics, but I still believe that there are ways out of it. Thank you very much.
Well, I just want to really thank you all for your tremendous support that you've given. If I may just address just very briefly. It seems to me that the one of the key issues mentioned was that we're really dealing with networks of organizations and with extremely complex organizations. And governments really, in order to achieve what I was talking about, we really need to have governments detached management. And this is what I was mentioning, the life of their own, and some of you didn't agree with that. Maybe I wasn't quite clear on it. There's a potential for a life of their own. I mean, the networks are so complicated, and the participants and the interest that, yes, and at some point, but you're right, the governments are still too much inside of it, but the potential for a life of their own, in my opinion, exists. Non-linear mentality and network multilateralism, absolutely. I think this is the key that needs to be really fulfilled in order to have any of what I was talking about. There was an interesting question: are we moving to multilateral network or witnessing the decline of the global order? I don't know the answer. I hope it's the first. I'm afraid we're also quite close to the latter, and this is why I think we're discussing the issue that we're discussing. The recent developments around us in the world don't give us much reason for optimism. I mean, we have huge challenges. Speaking from a European perspective. In terms of security, in terms of nation building, in terms of reform. We might be a bit more successful than we are, and we should be a bit more successful than we are in different fora and organizations. Organizations are not willing to cooperate and share, absolutely. I mean, look at the situation with European Union joining the European Convention on Human Rights. And then we have the ruling of the ruling of the court that this can't be done, and the whole thing goes pretty much away. I'm afraid. None of our institutions are ideal, absolutely yes, but we have to. I mean, the idea I think behind these organizations is to try to find ways, to try to discuss ways how to make them. There is not enough guiding force and principles. Yes, absolutely. And this is also coming back to what Mr. Laszlo commented. The question is still, what are we actually doing? What are we doing, and what is the guiding force, and what are the principles that we should be behind, and on which we should build the international political order, if I may use this formulation. But I'm going to stop here because I think we've run out of all time that we have. Thank you so much for your support.